Welcome to Reformed Thinking, where we take a deep dive into the ideas that shape what we believe and how we actually live.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm really looking forward to getting into this material today.
So to start us off, I want you to think about the physical sensation of walking into a criminal courthouse.
Oh man, just the thought of it kind of makes my stomach drop, to be honest.
Right. Because usually when we talk about being put on trial, there is this expectation of a very specific layout.
Yeah.
It feels, well, cold, intensely structural.
Yeah, absolutely.
You walk through those heavy, reinforced wooden doors, and the first thing you notice is the elevation. You see the judge sitting up high behind that massive mahogany bench, literally looking down on the room.
The architecture is totally engineered to intimidate the human psyche. It is constructed to establish absolute authority.
And strict severity, right? The gavel rests right there on the desk. The rules are binary, guilty or not guilty.
There is zero room for ambiguity there. No room for casual conversation. The entire space just tells you to be quiet, know your place, and wait for the verdict.
And as human beings, we understand that environment implicitly. We know how to act when we are on trial. We know the defensive posture to take.
You fold your hands, you lower your eyes, you speak only when spoken to.
Yeah, it feels clean, it feels transactional, and let us be honest with ourselves, it is utterly terrifying. But then you consider what it means to walk into a family living room.
Completely different vibe.
Completely. The architecture is totally different. There is warmth. The furniture is arranged to, facilitate looking at one another.
The living room is the absolute definition of an environment built for relationship, not retribution.
Right. There is a father sitting in a chair, not searching for a reason to throw the book at you, but waiting to listen, waiting to show affection. It is an environment built for safety.
It requires a completely different emotional posture. You do not walk into a living room with your hands tied behind your back waiting for a sentence. You walk in expecting to be received.
But here is the issue. When we look at how people approach God, they almost always default to the courtroom.
Oh, totally, 100%.
They stay locked in that judicial mindset, just terrified of the gavel. So today, our mission on this deep dive is to analyze a specific chapter from a classic text by the 17th century theologian John Owen.
A fantastic text.
Yeah, it focuses specifically on communion with the Father in love. We're going to examine a very common assumption many people hold, which is viewing God the Father as a harsh, unapproachable, perpetually irritated judge.
Meanwhile, Jesus is viewed as the kind rescuer who steps in to save humanity from the Father's wrath.
Spot on. It is this good cop, bad cop dynamic.
And it is a massive misconception. Yet it is incredibly widespread across almost every denomination.
So Owen wrote this text specifically to dismantle that precise error, right?
He did. The thesis of the source material we are looking at today is that true communion requires seeing the Father himself as the absolute fountain and origin of love.
The origin, not just a bystander.
Right. He is not some reluctant participant who had to be convinced to save you. He is the very source of the entire operation.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? Whether you are driving your commute right now or folding laundry, I want to prompt our first major shift here by asking a direct question.
Go for it.
If the Father is the origin of love, why do so many believers struggle with constant feelings of anxiety and doubt regarding his goodwill? Like, why is the default human setting a state of suspicion toward the Father?
Well, Owen identifies this exact lack of familiarity right at the beginning of his work. He observes that Christians rarely engage in direct, immediate communion with the Father in love.
And when he uses the word communion, what is he talking about?
Good question. He is not talking about some mystical trance or a formalized religious ritual. He is talking about an active daily fellowship, a literal exchange of affection.
The daily reality.
Right. And he notes this lack of communion is not just a tragedy, but actually a sin, and a primary cause of human distress.
Because people mistakenly believe there is zero sweetness in the Father except what is purchased by the blood of Jesus.
Yeah, they think the Father is perpetually stern, arms crossed, frowning from heaven, just waiting for them to mess up.
Let's unpack this good cop, bad cop routine we project onto heaven, because that paints a picture where Jesus is the one doing all the heavy lifting in the affection department.
We map police interrogation tactics right onto the Trinity. It is crazy when you think about it.
It is. Jesus is the good cop. He comes in with a cup of coffee, pulls up a chair, speaks softly, and says, "Look, I'm trying to help you out here. I want to cut you a deal.
Meanwhile, the father is the bad cop, standing in the corner, slamming his hands on the table, ready to lock us up forever.
We act as if the father had to be bribed or paid off by the son to even look at us without disgust.
Precisely. And that ruins our entire theology. While Jesus is undeniably the sole means of communication and reconciliation between God and humanity, the mediator, the origin of that grace is the Father's own bosom.
He is the starting point.
He is. The text highlights the tragedy of failing to listen to the voice of the Spirit, who is given to us so we might know the things freely bestowed on us by God.
And this failure results in believers carrying a heavy, burdened heart, right?
Yeah, living under a cloud of low-level dread when they could and should be rejoicing.
But wait, why do human beings instinctively do this? If a believer focuses solely on God's terrible majesty and severity, as Owen writes, doesn't that just mean they have a healthy respect for God?
I mean, that is what people tell themselves.
Because the Bible does talk about the fear of the Lord.
Mm.
So why does Owen argue that this focus on severity actually prevents us from drawing near to him?
Because raw terror does not produce intimacy. If we consider the psychological impact of this bad cop view, it becomes obvious why misunderstanding God causes people to retreat from him.
You run from what you were afraid of.
Right. If someone only focuses on severity, they cannot bear to spend even 10 minutes with him in spiritual meditation, let alone an hour.
You do not want to sit in a room with someone who you believe despises you or is just tolerating you because of a technicality.
True reverence is not the same as cowering in a corner like a beaten dog. The source material argues that lacking insight into the Father's love means believers fail to draw near.
They keep their distance.
Yeah, hoping they can just slip by unnoticed, maybe sitting in the back pew of the universe, hoping the judge does not call their name.
It is the ultimate flight response. And if focusing only on severity causes us to run away, we obviously need a completely new portrait of who the Father actually is.
We need to tear down the bad cop image entirely.
And Owen does not just throw out a bumper sticker slogan like God is love and leave it there. He systematically breaks down the architecture of this affection into 4 distinct attributes.
Yes, and before we examine the 4 attributes, we have to establish whose love this is. This is the love of a completely self-sufficient God.
Self-sufficient, meaning he doesn't need us.
Right. He does not need to look outside himself for satisfaction. He is infinitely satisfied with his own glorious perfections.
He is the Son, his eternal wisdom in whom he rejoices.
Yeah, he could find satisfaction within the fellowship of the Trinity for all eternity. Yet, he chooses to love saints for their own good.
That concept alone shifts the ground under our feet. He does not love because he is lonely. It is not a needy, codependent love.
Oh, not at all.
He didn't create humanity because heaven was a bit quiet and he wanted some company.
You hit the nail on the head. It is the love of a God whose natural expression is overflowing kindness and generosity. It is an overflow, not a deficit.
Okay, so the 4 attributes of this love are eternal, free, unchangeable, and distinguishing. Let's tackle the first one, eternal.
The text references Proverbs 8.30, detailing how the Father's delight in the Son existed before the foundation of the world.
Before anything was created.
Yes, the Father laid a plan of happiness for us in his own bosom from eternity.
Meaning, before time even started ticking, before I ever existed, before I ever had a chance to do anything right or anything terribly wrong, this affection was already locked in.
The text requires us to grasp that the Son was daily the Father's delight, and the Son's delights were with the sons of men.
Meaning in the thoughts of kindness and redemption for them.
This love predates time itself. You cannot surprise God with a mistake that retroactively changes a love that existed before the universe was spoken into existence.
Wow. If we really believe that, it logically leads right into the second attribute, free.
The best word for it.
The text asserts that this love exists simply because God wills it. There is zero merit in the human recipient. None.
Absolutely none.
Let's put this into a modern context. Think about the difference between an unearned lottery win versus a standard weekly paycheck.
Okay, yeah, I like that comparison.
So if you work a 40-hour week in a warehouse and your boss hands you a paycheck, you feel you earned it. You traded your sweat and time for that money.
You walk into the bank, deposit it, and you feel entirely justified.
Yeah, that transaction actually diminishes any sense of staggering gratitude. You don't weep with thankfulness when the ATM accepts your deposit.
No, you just take your receipt and leave.
But if someone walks up to you on the street and hands you a winning lottery ticket worth $100 million, a ticket you did not even buy, the reaction is pure shock.
Because it is completely unearned.
But humans hate the lottery concept when it comes to God. Why do we resist the free aspect of this love so fiercely?
It comes down to human autonomy and pride. Human pride demands a paycheck. We desperately want to feel that we contributed, that we have some inherent value or good behavior that forced God's hand.
We want to be able to point to our resume and say, see, I made a good moral choice here, therefore I am lovable.
But understanding that this love predates our existence and is entirely unearned crushes that ego. The text states that if we were deserving of his love, its value would be severely diminished. It would just be a wage.
Just another transaction.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, totally. The realization that it is absolutely free is the only thing that can humble a human soul to the lowest depths of holy reverence while simultaneously causing it to leap for joy. It strips you of your boasting.
We want to maintain control. If it is a paycheck, I control the outcome based on my performance.
Right.
If it is free grace, I am totally dependent on the giver, and that terrifies the human ego, which connects to the third attribute, unchangeable.
Owen contrasts our daily, erratic human inconsistency with God's steady patience.
He points out a very sobering reality about human nature here.
He really does. If our daily provocation, our constant failures, our wandering eyes, and our selfish thoughts could stop this love, it would have ceased a long time ago.
We fluctuate every single day. Our moods shift, our devotion wavers depending on how much sleep we got or how our day at work went.
But God's love does not operate on a fluctuating stock market of human performance. He references 2 Peter 3.9, highlighting God's immense forbearance.
Because without this unchangeable nature of his love, the text notes, every single one of us would perish.
Oh, without a doubt.
It is a flat line, but in the best possible way. A steady, unbroken pulse. But then we hit the fourth attribute, and I have to push back here because this is the one that offends modern sensibilities more than anything else.
The distinguishing attribute.
Yes, the fourth attribute is distinguishing.
The source tackles the immense theological weight of the scriptural phrase, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated.
Yeah.
It notes that God chooses to set his love upon some, passing by millions who are no different by nature.
Okay, let's stop right there. To a modern ear, that sounds incredibly unfair. It sounds like divine favoritism.
I get why people think that.
If God's love is so grand, why is it distinguishing? Why does he pass by people who are, as the text says, no different by nature? Doesn't this contradict the idea of a loving father and make him sound capricious, just picking winners and losers arbitrarily?
That is the natural human reaction, but we have to look at the baseline. The baseline is that all of humanity is actively rebelling against the Creator.
Everyone is essentially guilty of treason.
Right. If God were simply fair, the courtroom gavel would fall on everyone, and everyone would face the severity of justice. No one deserves the unearned lottery ticket we discussed earlier.
So nobody is owed anything?
Nobody. Therefore, when God chooses to extend mercy to some, to bestow this distinguishing love, he is not being unfair to the rest. He is being just to the rest and merciful to his elect.
Why he does this exceeds our human understanding.
It is hidden in the secret counsel of his will. But for the believer, the reality of this distinguishing love should captivate the soul.
It means you were specifically chosen.
Yeah, not because you were better than Esau, but simply because of the free, unmerited grace of the Father.
That is a harsh pill for the ego to swallow, but an incredibly comforting reality once you actually digest it.
Absolutely.
Knowing these 4 data points, eternal, free, unchangeable, distinguishing, is intellectually satisfying. We can chart it out on a whiteboard. It makes for great, robust theology.
It does.
But how does a person move from academic agreement to actual lived experience? Like, how do we stop just nodding our heads at John Owen's 17th century logic and start actually receiving this in our daily lives?
Well, Owen addresses this exact friction. He insists that all intellectual contemplation is completely useless unless the love is received by faith.
You cannot just catalog these 4 attributes in your brain like trivia facts.
No, the mind must recognize the love, the will must actively embrace it as reality, and the affections must be filled with it. It requires participation.
You have to step out of the courtroom and actually sit down in the living room.
I love that imagery, yes.
And here is a psychological revelation from the text that totally stopped me in my tracks. It is highly pleasing to the Father when we view him as tender and kind.
It sounds so simple, but it is huge.
Let me say that again. God is pleased when you think of him as a warm, welcoming Father.
Yes. And conversely, our flesh and blood naturally harbor harsh thoughts of him. As we analyzed earlier, people view him as perpetually angry and eager to punish.
And Satan actively rejoices in this slander. It serves the enemy's purpose perfectly.
If we look back at the historical account of the Garden of Eden, the very first murder of the human soul was accomplished by Satan, making humanity question God's goodwill.
Let's analyze that Eden narrative. The serpent didn't just walk up and say, "Hey, try this fruit, it tastes amazing." The temptation was intensely theological.
Very theological, the serpent asked. Did God truly say? He planted the seed that God was holding out on them, that God was restrictive, harsh, and withholding the best place of life.
The implication was that God is a tyrant keeping you in the dark.
Yeah. Once Eve accepted that false premise about the Father's character, taking the fruit was just the logical next step. The action followed the corrupted theology.
I have a pointed question about this default human setting.
Okay.
Why do believers feel it is audacious or even arrogant to think of God as deeply loving toward them, yet they feel completely justified and safe, thinking of him as fierce and unforgiving?
It is a strange irony.
Humans attribute the worst character traits of the absolute worst people to God traits we read about in Romans 1.31 or 2 Timothy 3.3, like being brutal, unforgiving, or without natural affection. And somehow, we think we're doing the right thing.
We think we're being exceptionally pious by viewing God as a tyrant.
Makes no sense.
It is a deceitful notion implanted by the enemy, masquerading as religious devotion. We confuse harshness with holiness.
We think that by magnifying God's anger against our sin, we are respecting his purity.
We beat ourselves up, walk around in perpetual guilt, and call it humility. But the text analyzes the intense grief this actually causes the spirit.
God challenges Zion in the scriptures, asking, "What wrong have you found in me? Have I been a barren wilderness to you?"
God detests these harsh thoughts because they yield incredibly bitter fruit. When you view God as an unforgiving tyrant, the result is alienation. You retreat.
You experience chronic unbelief and wavering.
Just as a child is reluctant to come into the presence of an explosive, angry parent, a believer will hide from a God they believe is constantly furious with them.
It is like trying to warm yourself by a fireplace in a cabin. But you are utterly convinced the fire only exists to burn the entire cabin to the ground.
You are going to stay out in the freezing cold.
But these harsh thoughts do not just happen in a vacuum, right? They manifest as highly specific, logical-sounding arguments in our heads. We rationalize our distance from God.
We do. And Owen dismantles 3 specific objections that the human mind throws up as defense mechanisms to avoid this intimacy.
Let's walk through those. The source material walks through 3 common objections raised by believers who are afraid to commune with the Father.
Right. The first objection is the fear of presumption.
A person looks at their own failures and says, "What if I am not accepted? God is a consuming fire. Should I not perish due to my arrogance rather than find sweetness in his embrace?"
Who am I to assume the creator of the universe wants to show me affection?
It sounds so humble on the surface, doesn't it?
Oh.
I am far too lowly to assume God loves me. I am just a worm.
Yeah.
We wear this self-deprecation like a badge of honor.
It wears the mask of humility, but underneath it is pure unbelief. The theological answer provided in the text is that assurance comes from believing the revelation God has given us.
1 John 4.16 says, "We have known and believed the love that God has for us."
The text is incredibly blunt here. Failing to believe this, or refusing to accept it because you think you're being super spiritual and humble, is actually attempting to make God a liar, based on 1 John 5.10.
Wow.
He who is absolute truth has spoken it. You are on the most secure ground in the universe when you simply believe what God has revealed about himself. It is not arrogant to believe God is telling the truth.
That is so freeing. Then we hit the second objection, which we can call the objection of exclusion.
Okay.
The argument goes like this. I believe God has love to others, but there is no logical reason for him to love me. I can totally see why he loves the pastor or my very patient neighbor who volunteers at the soup kitchen, but I know my own mind.
I know the dark thoughts I had on the drive to work this morning.
I know my own repeated failures behind closed doors. He has no cause to tone his thoughts of kindness toward me. It is a spiritual imposter syndrome.
The answer to this is tied directly back to the free attribute of God's love we discussed earlier.
Right.
The text points out a leveling truth. God has no reason to love anyone apart from himself. He has just as much reason to fix his love upon you as he does upon any of his children, which is, honestly, none at all.
Everyone brings zero merit to the table.
This actually places everyone on the exact same secure foundation. Your lack of merit is not a unique disqualification. It is the universal standard prerequisite.
That levels the playing field completely. The ground is totally flat at the foot of the cross.
Totally flat.
My neighbor's volunteer work doesn't buy him an inch more of the Father's eternal love than my miserable failures cost me, because a love was established before either of us were born.
It is so counterintuitive to how we normally operate.
It really is. Then we have the third objection, which is perhaps the most insidious trap of all, the lack of reciprocal feelings.
Oh, this one is huge.
The believer says, I don't feel love for God right now. My heart is cold. If I could sense my soul being devoted to Him, if I could just muster up some passion during worship, then I could believe that His soul delights in me.
The text exposes the sheer danger of this as backward thinking. It references 1 John 4.7, which explicitly states the correct chronological order.
In this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us first.
It is completely absurd when you play it out in your head.
Think about trying to use monopoly money in the real world. Trying to manufacture our own emotional love first in order to give God a reason to love us back is like walking up to the owner of a breathtaking multi-billion-dollar real estate estate and trying to buy it with fake pink and yellow board game cash.
That is a great visual.
You are standing at the Golden Gates holding your flimsy paper money saying, look at my devotion. Look at the tears I cried during Sunday service. Now will you hand over the deed to your eternal affection?
It is ridiculous.
How does this backward thinking actually rob God of His glory?
It robs Him of His glory because it makes your emotional state the catalyst rather than His sovereign grace.
You are putting yourself in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you are proposing that you should somehow generate love for God out of your own fallen nature before knowing anything lovely about Him, like whether He actually loves you or not.
The text details how demanding a reason within ourselves for God to love us is a fleshy tactic.
It is another attempt to maintain control. Setting aside human reasoning, dropping the monopoly money, and embracing the Father's love by pure faith is the only mechanism that opens the human soul to pour out love in return.
You cannot manufacture the love.
You can only reflect the immense love that has already been poured onto you.
So once a person finally stops arguing with God, puts away their fake currency, and accepts this unearned distinguishing affection, their entire relationship with the hostile outside world shifts dramatically.
It completely rewires how they interact with their environment.
It really does. The text outlines the high honor bestowed upon those who accept this grace. They stand confidently in the presence of the Father.
And this daily communion functions as a safe, delightful refuge amidst worldly scorn, scandals, and the constant misrepresentations we face in society.
Owen draws a sharp, uncomfortable line here between true believers and what he calls empty professors.
Yeah, let's clarify that term for a modern listener. We are not talking about a university lecturer in a tweed jacket.
Right. An empty professor, in 17th century theological jargon, is someone who professes the faith with their mouth. They say all the right Christian things, but they are empty inside. They are a hypocrite.
Let's talk about the sanctuary aspect first, and how the true believer experiences it versus the empty professor.
The text uses a beautiful historical reference to illustrate this sanctuary.
It mentions the Queen Sheba, who traveled a massive distance across the ancient world, and then pronounced a blessing upon the servants of King Solomon, just because they were able to stand before him every day and hear his wisdom.
The text asks a comparative question. How much greater is the unparalleled privilege of the believer who continually stands before the God of Solomon, hearing his eternal wisdom and enjoying his boundless love?
It is an incredible elevation of status. You go from a terrified defendant in a courtroom to a beloved child standing in the throne room.
And it provides immense psychological comfort. The text unpacks Isaiah 66.13, showing how God comforts like a mother when a believer is mistreated by the outside world.
Think of the imagery. When a child is bullied out on the street, they do not stand there and try to rationalize with the bullies.
No.
They run swiftly to the comforting embrace of their parent to voice their complaints, to cry, and to find absolute solace.
Let's apply this practically for the listener. True believers are often viewed by the broader secular culture as, to quote the text, a starry company of rebellious and contentious individuals.
The world does not understand the Christian ethic and often holds it in sheer contempt.
How does a modern listener practically run to this bosom of the Father when they are facing harsh judgments at their corporate job, or verbal attacks in their local community, or when they're being targeted and canceled on social media for holding to biblical convictions?
It all comes down to where you habitually seek your vindication and your solace. Outwardly, a true believer and a fruitless professor might look identical on a Sunday morning.
They might attend the same church events, sing the same songs, and perform the same civic duties.
But the text asks us to look closely at their secret retreats. When the immense pressure of public opinion hits, the hypocrite naturally communes with the world and their own lusts.
They desperately look for validation from the crowd.
Yeah, they compromise their ethics to fit in, or they numb their anxiety with earthly pleasures. But the true sane retreats into the sweet, secret embrace of their Father's love.
They find spiritual sustenance, unshakable identity, and joy in a hidden life that the rest of the world is completely blind to.
The saint can look at a hostile culture and say, "If I am hated in the world, I will go where I am absolutely certain of love."
That secret sanctuary is a place of immense comfort, a heavy shield against the arrows of a cynical world.
But Owen is very clear that it is not a place of compromise. The Father's love is unconditional in its origin, but it has strict boundaries regarding what can be brought into that sanctuary of communion.
Yes. The text addresses a final, crucial exhortation in this chapter, which focuses on the absolute incompatibility of light and darkness.
Because God is a consuming fire of purity, there is zero communion between those two elements. Sin and worldly lust cannot dwell in the same thoughts that receive and express love from the Father.
Practical holiness is an absolute requirement for enjoying this fellowship.
This concept can be hard to grasp for some people, so picture this scenario. Imagine you have been given the privilege of playing a pristine, delicately tuned, multi-million-dollar Stradivarius violin.
A total masterpiece.
But your hands are covered in thick, greasy, abrasive mud. It is practically impossible to play it. You cannot produce the beautiful music it was designed for, and worse, you are going to ruin the instrument.
The mud and the masterpiece simply cannot occupy the same space. They are fundamentally incompatible.
Right.
But this raises a massive tension in the text, and I want you to clarify this. How does this uncompromising demand for strict holiness reconcile with the earlier point about God's love being completely free, unearned, and independent of our performance?
It is a fair question.
If I don't earn the love through good behavior, why does the love demand such strict purity?
That is the core paradox that trips up so many people, but they are not opposed concepts. They are sequentially linked.
Okay, explain that.
The free nature of the love is the very motive for the holiness. The text quotes the prophet Hosea regarding the tribe of Ephraim, who exclaimed, "What more have I to do with idols?" the moment he found true salvation in God.
So encountering pure, unmerited grace actually destroys the internal appetite for cheap, worldly lusts.
If you truly understand the staggering value of the Father's love, the mud completely loses its appeal. You wash your hands not to earn the right to hold the violin, but because the sheer privilege of holding the violin makes you utterly despise the mud.
That clears up the tension perfectly. You don't get clean to earn the love makes you want to get clean.
Precisely. The text references 1 John 1.6 and 1 John 2.4 to hammer this home. Claiming familiarity with the Father while deliberately walking in darkness or happily ignoring his commandments simply proves a person is a liar.
Any glorious pretense of having a deep, familiar relationship with the Father while living in unrepentant rebellion is a complete falsehood.
The love of the world and the love of the Father cannot coexist in the same heart. An unclean spirit cannot approach him, and an unholy heart literally cannot abide in his presence.
Walking with God is not a matter of mere outward religious form or checking boxes on a moral to-do list. It is a matter of a true internal reality being renewed by contact with divine love.
It is an internal shift that changes everything on the outside.
So bringing all these massive concepts together, we have covered a monumental paradigm shift today. We have traced the walk from viewing the Father as a harsh, distant judge sitting on a cold wooden bench, eager to drop the gavel on our failures, to seeing him as the eternal, self-sufficient fountain of completely free love.
A love that predates our very existence.
A love that requires us to drop our fake monopoly money, abandon our pride, and receive it by pure faith. And a love that produces a desire for practical holiness precisely because of its breathtaking purity.
It is a complete theological and psychological reset for the human mind. It forces the believer to completely abandon the terrifying courtroom mentality and step boldly into the living room, permanently accepting the posture of a beloved child rather than a trembling defensive defendant.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final question to turn over in your mind this week. The next time you fail, the next time you fall into that familiar sin or make a mess of things, pay close attention to your immediate gut-level instinct.
What is your first reaction?
Do you run away and hide in shame because you assume the Father is standing there in the courtroom with a gavel, furious and disappointed? Or do you run directly toward him, into the living room, knowing his distinguishing love was securely fixed upon you before the foundation of the world, long before you ever made that mistake? Thank you for joining this session of Reformed Thinking. We will catch you on the next deep dive.